It had been 20 years since Caroline Whitmore last heard her son's voice. But there were moments, quiet ones, when she swore she could still hear it. Drifting through the trees behind their old farmhouse in Elm Hollow, Illinois, a faint echo, a ghost wrapped in wind. July 3rd, 1991, was the day before his 9th birthday, and it was the last day anyone ever saw Charlie Whitmore. Carolyn had kissed him on the forehead that morning. He was barefoot, covered in sleep, clutching the frayed hem of his favorite blanket. "Go get dressed," she'd said, half laughing. "We've got a treehouse to clean before your party." He grinned, lopsided, and shuffled off, leaving his cereal untouched. By noon, the balloons were up, the cake was frosted, and the gifts lined the kitchen counter. But Charlie wasn't back. By 2 p.m., the laughter stopped. Caroline had called for him, first casually, then urgently. The woods behind their home were small, safe, she'd always believed. He'd built the treehouse himself with his dad's help. It was his world, his fortress. She checked it 3 times that afternoon. Each time, it was the same. Empty, dusty, still. Then she noticed the ladder. It wasn't where it should have been. Normally, Charlie pulled it up with a rope pulley, proud of his castle gate, but this time, it was lying at a strange angle on the ground. She climbed. The treehouse floorboards creaked. His comics were still there. His canteen. A flashlight, but no Charlie. She searched the backyard, then the woods, then the neighbor's yard. By 3:30 p.m., she was at the sheriff's office. By sundown, there were dogs, flashlights, and volunteers calling his name. By sunrise, there was only silence. The treehouse had no doors, no other exits. The woods had no deep ravines, no rivers. Nothing had been disturbed. No struggle, no signs of injury.
Ow.
The ladder wasn't broken. Charlie had simply disappeared. The police combed the area for weeks. Divers searched the small creek. Helicopters flew overhead. Nothing. A few people reported seeing a man in a green truck near the tree line that day. But the description was vague. No license plate, no follow-up, no suspects. The story made local news, then disappeared. Just like Charlie, the official report listed it as child missing. Presumed abducted, but Caroline never believed he was taken by a stranger. Something about it never fit. His shoes were still by the back door. His walkie-talkie was left charging on the kitchen counter. He never left home without it. The search turned into a vigil, then a grave. Mark Whitmore, Charlie's father, died of a stroke in 1999. Some said it was heartbreak. Caroline stayed in the house. She never repainted Charlie's room, never took down the happy 9th birthday banner that still hung, half-faded, in the attic. Each year she lit a candle at the edge of the tree line. Each year she whispered, "Come home." She never stopped. Not once. In 2011, 20 years later, the property changed hands. Caroline, now in her 60s and recently diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's, agreed to sell the house to a young couple. The pain of that decision nearly killed her, but the upkeep had become impossible. The treehouse had long since rotted, the barn was sinking, and the past hung on everything like mildew. But there was one condition. She asked the new owners, Kyle and Amanda, not to tear down the treehouse. "It's all I have left," she'd said. "I know it sounds silly, but that tree holds more than you think," they agreed. Out of kindness, or maybe curiosity, they moved in late August. By October, Amanda called the sheriff. She had been cleaning the treehouse, trying to salvage it for their own kids, when her foot slipped between 2 floorboards. She reached down to adjust the broken plank and found something strange. The wood underneath wasn't solid ground, it was hollow. Amanda pried the boards loose. Beneath them was a square of metal, bolted into the wood, a faint outline of a door, a trapdoor, not just hidden but sealed. The next day, the sheriff's department brought in a team. It took hours to remove the surrounding planks without collapsing the old structure. They lifted the trapdoor. Below it was a narrow wooden tunnel, barely 3 feet wide, descending at a steep angle into the ground. No one had ever reported this. No blueprints showed a structure beneath the treehouse. Caroline was called immediately. She stood at the edge of the tunnel, tears in her eyes, clutching Charlie's last school photo in her hand. Wasn't there before, she whispered. "We built that treehouse ourselves. I was there every nail, every board." The sheriff believed her, which meant someone had added it later. But why? The tunnel led downward into packed earth. Old wooden planks reinforced the walls, no mold, no rot. It had been sealed airtight. The space at the bottom was small, maybe 8 by 8 feet, lined with old carpet. A tiny table, a chair, a flashlight, and something else, a shoebox. Inside the box were a comic book, a pair of toy binoculars, and a worn photograph of Charlie. Only he looked older, 11, maybe 12. His hair was longer, his eyes a little sadder. The back of the photo was labeled 1993. Caroline collapsed. If the photo was real, if it wasn't faked, then Charlie had still been alive 2 years after he vanished. But where? Why underground? Who had kept him there? And why had no one ever heard him? Forensics took over. They confirmed the tunnel had been dug at least 15 to 20 years prior. No fingerprints were on the box, but soil samples matched those from the original treehouse site. Charlie had been there longer than anyone ever imagined.
And I mentioned something else.
During renovations, her husband had found an old journal tucked into the barn rafters. He thought it was just a forgotten diary from the previous owners. He hadn't opened it. They brought it to Caroline. The front cover was blank. Inside were drawings, childlike, frantic, messy. One showed a ladder. Another showed a small room underground. Then words scribbled over and over. She said, "I can't leave. I heard them calling, but I couldn't shout. Don't tell anyone. Hide. She brings food. She cries. She says it's for my own good." Caroline's hands shook because Charlie had always drawn like that. Crayons pressed so hard they tore the page. She recognized his handwriting. But who was she? A stranger? Someone they knew? The journal ended abruptly. The last page had one sentence. She said, "If they find me," she vanished too. Caroline turned to Reese Harper, now the town's lead investigator. "I need you to reopen the case," she said. Reese nodded. "I already have." Reese Harper had grown up in Elm Hollow. He'd been just a teenager when Charlie Whitmore vanished in 1991. He remembered the search parties, the missing posters on telephone poles, the candlelight vigils. Back then, the case had haunted him. Now, as the town's chief investigator, it was personal. He spent the next week in the archives, digging through everything. The original case files, terrain maps, construction records. The tunnel hadn't been discovered in 1991 because no one thought to check beneath the floorboards. It had been assumed the treehouse was just that, a childhood escape, not a hidden room. But now, everything had to be re-examined. The shoebox, the aged photo. The journal all pointed to one devastating truth. Charlie hadn't been taken far. He had been right there. So the question was, for how long and with whom? Forensics confirmed the photograph wasn't doctored. It had aged naturally, the type of ink. The wear on the paper had all dated back to the early 90s. The boy in the photo was unmistakably Charlie. That meant he had been alive 2 years after his disappearance. But there were no records of sightings, no physical evidence, nothing that could lead them further except that journal. Reese read it cover to cover. Every page was a scream in silence. She says the woods are dangerous. She locks the trapdoor at night. "I miss Mom. I hear her. I think she hears me too." He kept circling one line. "She brings food. She cries. She says it's for my own good." Who was she? Reese made a list of everyone who lived near the Whitmore property in 1991. Neighbors, tenants, farmhands. One name jumped out immediately: Margaret Clary, a widow with no children, who lived alone in the red cottage at the end of Willow Lane, barely half a mile from the Whitmore woods. She had moved out in 1994 after a fire damaged her property. No forwarding address. She had barely interacted with the Whitmores back then, kept to herself, according to the original reports. But something about the timeline didn't sit right with Reese. He paid a visit to the old Clary home. The place was still standing, barely. The roof was sunken in, the windows boarded, vines choking the chimney, but the basement door was padlocked, not new, but strong. Reese requested a search warrant. Inside, they found what they were looking for. In the far corner of the basement, beneath a rotted rug, was a wooden panel, another trapdoor. This one led to a cramped, windowless space. No furniture, just an old mattress, moldy and sunken. The walls were scratched with marks to lease, maybe dozens of them. A child had lived here. For how long? No one could say. The far wall carved. Faintly in the brick were the initials C.W., Charlie Whitmore. Reese's stomach turned. He contacted the Department of Social Services, asking for every file connected to Margaret Clary. There wasn't much. A single report from 1985, when she'd applied to be a foster parent and was denied due to emotional instability. No further records. Nothing official, but there was a note in the file. A name scrawled in the margin, Dorothy Clary. Reese cross-referenced that name and found something unexpected. Dorothy had been Margaret's younger sister, and she hadn't left Elm Hollow. In fact, she was still there, working as a home health aide at a senior facility on the east side of town. He paid her a visit. She was in her late 60s now, wearing a floral scrub top, her hair pinned up tightly. When Reese showed her the photo of the room in the basement, she didn't flinch. "I always knew my sister was troubled," she said calmly. "But I didn't know how bad it got. Did she ever talk about the Whitmore boy?" Reese asked. She hesitated. "Once, maybe. She said something about keeping him safe. I thought she meant her cats. She had cats back then, always talking to them like they were children." "Did she ever have a child in her care?" Dorothy shook her head. "Not legally, but there was a boy, small, quiet. I saw him once through the window. He looked pale, frail. I asked her who he was. She told me to mind my own business." Reese leaned in. "Do you know where she went after the fire in '94? She moved up north near Galena. I think she was living with someone from the church, but I lost contact after 2001. He had enough to build a timeline. Charlie disappears in July 1991. Margaret Clary, living just across the woods, keeps a secret underground space in her basement, likely for hiding him. No one ever searches her property. She moves in 1994. The Whitmores had no reason to suspect her, no history of crime, no connection except proximity. And then there was the journal. Reese reread the last entry. She said, "If they find me." She vanished too. What did Charlie mean? Was Margaret threatening him or protecting him? Reese considered something that chilled him. What if she wasn't the one who took him in the first place? What if someone else had left him there and she kept him hidden? The idea seemed absurd until Reese got the call. It was from the forensics team. They had taken soil samples from the Treehouse tunnel and matched them to a construction site record from 1993. A property outside of town, formerly owned by a man named Douglas Claymore. That name had never come up before. It wasn't on the police list from 1991 because he hadn't moved to Elm Hollow until 1992. Reese ran the name. Claymore had a record, sealed juvenile files, minor assault charges in the late 80s, worked as a contractor, hired briefly in '93 to help repair old barns near the Whitmore property. Reese tracked down the owner of the barn, an elderly woman named Mrs. Edna Blake. She remembered him clearly. He was odd, she said. Always staring off, said he used to be an orphan, spoke a lot about how kids weren't safe with their families. Gave me the creeps. Reese drove to Claymore's last known address, vacant for years. But inside, in a back closet, he found a box. Inside the box were tools, rope, a rusted lock, and a stack of drawings, all of children. One was unmistakably Charlie, and in the corner of the page, written in tiny pencil strokes, "He's safer underground. The voices can't reach him there." Reese stepped outside, heart pounding. There was no longer a question. Someone had built that tunnel deliberately. Someone had hidden Charlie. Someone had convinced a mentally unstable woman to help, or at least to keep silent. And now that someone had vanished? Carolyn sat by the window in her small rental apartment, staring out at the skeletal trees of late October. A cup of tea sat untouched in her hands. It had gone cold hours ago. The weight of 20 years had aged her from the inside out. But now there was movement in the stillness, and that terrified her more than anything. For years her grief had been static, predictable. But this was something else, sharp, moving, real. They'd found a trap door, a journal, a photograph. Her son had been alive for at least 2 more years after that awful July day. But no one could tell her when he stopped being alive. She looked over at the photograph of Mark, her late husband. She wished he were here. He would have known what to do. He would have kept her grounded. The phone rang. It was Reese, Caroline. He said softly, "I think we found the man who built the tunnel." Her fingers gripped the armrest. "His name is Douglas Claymore. He worked construction in Elm Hollow from 92 to 94. He had access to your property, worked on nearby barns." Reese hesitated. He found drawings in his old house drawings of Charlie. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Finally, she asked, "Is he alive?" "We don't know," Reese replied. "He hasn't been seen in over 10 years. Carolyn closed her eyes. "So this man, he was near my son. He saw him." "Yes, we believe so." She took a breath. "Then find him." Reese reopened the Claymore file. The man had been quiet, legally speaking no arrests, since 1996. He had once lived on the edge of town in a rented trailer before moving west. After that, it was fragments. A traffic ticket in Iowa, a possible address in Colorado, but no solid leads. Was a drifter, but something new came in that afternoon. A woman named Delilah Brandt, a nurse who worked at a state mental health facility in Missouri, called the sheriff's department after watching a news segment on the rediscovered tunnel. "I know that face," she said, referring to Charlie's photo. "I'm sure I had a patient years ago. I think he was your missing boy." Reese and Caroline flew out the next morning. The facility was clean, quiet, but locked tight behind heavy doors. And silence. Delilah met them in the visitor's lobby. "I worked here from 2002 to 2007, she said. "During that time, we had a teenager brought in under unusual circumstances. He'd been found wandering near an abandoned lot outside of Branson. No ID, no shoes, covered in dirt." Caroline's face went pale. "He didn't speak for the first 6 months. Then he gave us a name, Charles. We tried matching it with a missing person databases, but nothing flagged. He refused to give a last name. Eventually, he just disappeared." Reese leaned in. "Disappeared. He was released." Delilah sighed. "After 2 years of treatment, he was quiet, nonviolent. The system failed him. He slipped through. Do you have a photo?" She nodded. He brought it out grainy, black and white, taken from his patient file. Caroline's hands trembled as she looked at it. It was him, thinner, older, guarded, but it was him. "My God," she whispered. "That's Charlie." Reese sat forward. "Do you know where he went after he left?" Delilah nodded. "He listed a contact on his discharge forms, a woman named Margaret C. Carolyn froze. Margaret Clary, she claimed to be his aunt, said she would take care of him." The air felt colder suddenly. Delilah handed over a copied form where Margaret Clary had signed her name in shaky handwriting. That meant Charlie had been moved from the hidden treehouse room to Margaret's home, then into state care, and then back to her. None of it made sense. Why would a woman who had allegedly hidden him in the first place voluntarily claim him later? Carolyn was losing her grip on logic, lest she hadn't taken him originally, lest someone else had. Back in Elm Hollow, Reese dove into property records. A disturbing pattern began to emerge. In 1991, Douglas Claymore worked on 3 homes: the Whitmore property, the Blake farm, and the Clary cottage. All 3 had one thing in common: access to secluded spaces, barns, basements, attics. All 3 had been structurally modified during that time. Reese requested blueprints from town records. Each of those properties had unpermitted additions: false floors, sealed rooms, crawl spaces. Someone had been preparing hiding places, not just for Charlie, but for others. Reese returned to the Clary property. This time he brought ground penetrating radar. The scan lit up. Beneath the foundation of an old shed near the back of the Clary lot was a cavity 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. They dug. Inside was nothing but a child's winter coat molded, shredded and carved into the dirt wall. Behind it, CW plus AS 1992, 2 sets of initials, Charlie Whitmore and someone else. Reese checked every missing persons file from 1991 to 1993 within a 100-mile radius, and there it was. Angela Sutter, aged 7, vanished while playing in her backyard in 1992, less than 15 miles from Elm Hollow. No suspects, no leads. The case was never connected to Charlie's until now. Carolyn sat quietly when Reese told her. "Angela?" she asked. "Do you think she was kept with him?" "I don't know," Reese said. "But she was definitely part of something bigger." Caroline stared out the window. "My son was alive," she said, "and he wasn't alone." That night, Caroline walked through the tree line behind her old house. She stood beneath the treehouse, now partially reconstructed by the new owners, and closed her eyes. Then she whispered, "Charlie, baby, if you can hear me, I'm still here." She turned to leave, but something caught her Aja carving on the base of the tree trunk. It was faint, worn by decades of wind and rain, but it was there. "Mom, try." Underneath, Caroline didn't sleep that night. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, holding a flashlight in her lap like it was the 1990s again. Like she was still walking the woods alone, calling Charlie's name. Her fingers kept tracing the photo of him found in the trapdoor room. The one labeled 1993. Her eyes had memorized every line of his older face, how much he had changed, and how much he hadn't. She kept repeating the carving over and over in her head. "Mom, try underneath." It had been faint, almost invisible, but she wasn't imagining it. It was real. Someone had carved it into the base of the tree, the one that held the treehouse, her son's tree. The next morning, before sunrise, she returned. This time, she brought gloves, a trowel, and a determination sharper than any tool. Amanda, the current homeowner, met her outside with a quiet nod. "You can take all the time you need," she said. Caroline climbed the slope behind the house and stood compounds before the tree. The bark was rough, but there, right at the base, was the carving. It wasn't deep and had clearly weathered over time, but it wasn't just a random etching. It was placed low, just above the roots, where a child might sit with a small pocket knife. And the handwriting, Caroline remembered how Charlie wrote his R's backward until second grade. The M in Mom had the same awkward angle. She dropped to her knees and began to dig. First it was just dirt cold, dark, packed tight with decades of roots and frost. But then something scraped against her trowel wood, not a tree root. Something man-made. A box. She cleared it gently, breath held in her throat. It was small, cedar, sealed shut but not locked. She opened it. Inside were folded pages, water-stained but legible. A drawing, a boy and a girl in a small room, holding hands. A note, written in a shaky but recognizable hand. She cried a lot. She wanted to go home, but she didn't know the way. I tried to. Remember the stars she described? But they weren't the same as ours. She said her mom had a locket with a red stone in it. If anyone finds this, tell her mom she wasn't bad. She just missed home. It was signed with 2 initials, C, W, and AS. Charlie. Whitmore and Angela Sutter. Caroline covered her mouth. She felt a trembling in her chest. Not just grief, but revelation. Charlie had left her a message, more than one, and not just for her, but for someone else's mother too. Reese arrived 20 minutes later. He studied the drawing for several minutes in silence. "She was there," he said. "Angela. And Charlie was with her. But where is she now?" Caroline whispered. "We don't know," Reese said, "but I'll find out." He contacted Angela Sutter's mother, Miriam, who now lived in Kansas. The phone call was quiet, careful. Miriam hadn't heard her daughter's name in nearly 2 decades, not from law enforcement. Anyway. When Reese told her about the note and the drawing, there was a long pause. Then, softly, she said, she had a locket, a red ruby. It was her grandmother's. She wore it every day. Reese scanned the police files again. The locket had never been recovered. Angela had disappeared from her backyard, a rural farmhouse not. Unlike the Whitmores, she'd been playing by the well, her tricycle left behind. No signs of a struggle, and just like Charlie, she had vanished. Now, after 20 years. Her name and Charlie's were carved into the same space, the room beneath the Clary basement. the trapdoor beneath the treehouse. Somehow they'd ended up together, but how? Reese began reworking the timeline. Charlie disappeared July 3rd, 1991. Angela vanished October 8th, 1992, 15 months apart. Both were 9 when they vanished, both taken from their own backyards, both near wooded areas, and both ended up in Elm Hollow. He reopened Claymore's records again, his work logs, mileage, payment receipts. One line stood out. October 9th, 1992, backfill, well casing, install locking cover. The address. Angela Sutter's house. Reese's hands clenched. Claymore had been hired to secure the well. Angela vanished from the day after she went missing. That couldn't be a coincidence. And now, 2 decades later, both kids' names were scratched into the same wall underground. Reese made the drive to Kansas the following morning. He met with Miriam in person. She was older now, quiet. Her hands trembled as she held the photo. Of the drawing found in the cedar box? That's her, she said, eyes glassy. Always drew little hearts around her name. That's her handwriting. Reese asked about the locket. She never went anywhere without it, Miriam whispered. I used to tell her it would help her find her way back if she ever got lost. He asked one more question. Did you know a man named Douglas Claymore? Her face darkened. He was the one who sealed the well. Came by that morning, said he was early. I didn't think much of it, just another contractor. Reese's stomach turned. He thanked her, promised to stay in touch, and returned to Elm Hollow. Back at the sheriff's office, he opened a map and marked every known job site Douglas. Claymore had worked between 1991 and 1994. There were 17 in total. 4 of them had underground cellars or sealed crawl spaces. 3 had recorded complaints of missing tools or unexplained access, and 2 were within 3 miles of where children had gone missing. He created a heat map. The center of the pattern was clear. Elm Hollow Woods, the Whitmore property, the Clary property, and an unmarked storage shed deep in the forest, built on land that had once belonged to the now-defunct Elm Hollow Youth Program, which toured it in 1989 due to funding cuts. No one had touched the building in 20 years. It was boarded up with no trespassing signs hung crooked from rusted nails. But when Reese pried the door open, the smell hit him first. Old wood, mildew, something deeper. There was a trapdoor. He opened it. The ladder creaked under his weight. The flashlight beam flicked across dirt walls. There were drawings all along the wall. Hearts, stars, trees, a boy and a girl holding hands. A name carved in small, uneven lettering, Charlie Reese, stood motionless in the narrow space beneath the abandoned youth shelter. The air was damp, laced with time and silence. His flashlight swept slowly across the walls again, revealing more drawings etched in chalk and old pencil. A crooked sun, stick figure beside a tall treehouse, and beneath it, a girl with curls, and a heart around her neck and Jula. She had been here too. It was undeniable now. Charlie and Angela were kept in multiple places, hidden, moved, relocated like ghosts through crawl spaces and trapdoors and forgotten buildings, always just beneath the surface of the world. But by whom and why? Reese climbed back up and marked the shed for forensics. It would take weeks to process everything, if they even found anything new. But he had a gut feeling. Someone had stayed here longer than anyone thought. Back at the sheriff's office, he laid out every clue. 3 underground rooms, the treehouse trapdoor, the Clary basement, and now the youth shelter crawl space. 3 drawings, each one showing Charlie with Angela. The same signature Douglas Claymore, but no body, no sightings, no conclusion.
Ow.
It was like following footprints in a fog. Then a call came in. A hiker 2 counties over had found something buried beneath a rotted stump in the woods near an old farm. A sealed tin lunchbox. Inside was a small red locket, a toy compass, and a torn page from a children's book, Where the Red Fern Grows. Same book Angela had checked out from her school library the week she disappeared, and the locket still whole, still red. Miriam Sutter confirmed it immediately. Angela's. Reese examined the inside of the tin. There were faint fingerprints. The lab confirmed something stunning. They matched Charlie's, which meant he was still alive when he buried it? The question was, why? Why leave clues? Why leave that, Caroline? Upon hearing the news, barely whispered, "He's still trying to be found." Reese knew she was right. Back in his office, Reese dug deeper into Claymore's past. What he found changed everything. Claymore hadn't just worked alone. In 1989, he was briefly employed by a small company, Midwest Youth Outreach Services, as a groundskeeper, the same company that ran the Elm Hollow Youth Program before it folded. Reese pulled the list of employees. One name jumped out: Margaret Clary. She had worked there as a part-time assistant, barely on payroll, listed as unofficial support. Margaret, the woman with the basement, the woman who had claimed Charlie. Years later at the mental facility, the woman who'd vanished. Reese called the number last listed in her file disconnected. Then he tried the backup contact, her sister Dorothy. Surprisingly, she answered. "I told you I lost contact with her," Dorothy said. "She changed numbers years ago. But you must have heard something?" Reese pressed. Silence. Then, "She wrote me once. Do you still have the letter?" "I never opened it." Reese drove over that evening. Dorothy handed over a yellowed envelope, postmarked in 2007, addressed but never unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I made a mistake. I kept something that wasn't mine. I thought I could fix it. I only made it worse. If anyone comes looking, tell them I tried to give him back." No name, no location, but one line at the bottom: "Check the roots of what grew wrong." Caroline read the letter herself. She held it for several minutes before whispering, "It's not a metaphor. She meant something real." Reese stared at her. "The tree," Caroline said. "The one behind the youth center, that old oak. Charlie and I planted it together in 1990. It was a memorial for his granddad." Reese drove there that night. The tree was massive now, roots like arms reaching into the earth. He walked its base in a slow circle with a flashlight. Then he saw it. A stone, small, almost flat, placed carefully at the root's curve. He lifted it. Beneath it, wrapped in plastic, was another note. Crude, handwritten. "If you find this, don't look for me. I'm not the same. I left because I had to. I was told if I ever tried to return, they'd take someone else. But I never stopped remembering." There was no signature. Just one thing. A P.O. box in Michigan. Reese froze. Caroline stared at it for a long time. "Do you think he left that?" "I do." Reese ran the P.O. box through the system. No official ID was attached, but a surveillance request to the local post office came back within 2 days. A man had been checking it for the past few months. Stall, roughly late 30s. Hat always low, sunglasses. Postal clerk remembered. One thing, he always brought one package. Never picked anything up. Just dropped something in. Same time, every 2 weeks. Reese asked to see the mail. There were 4 small packages still in processing, addressed to M. Clary in 3 different cities. One had no return address. One was labeled for A, and the third had only 2 words: "I forgive you." Caroline clutched her chest. The clerk gave them security footage from the last drop-off. Caroline watched it in the office. It was grainy, Loris, but the moment he turned toward the door, his face caught the light for a single frame. Gray eyes, dark hair, a scar along the right cheek, a little older, leaner, but unmistakably him. Caroline pressed her fingers to the screen. "That's Charlie," she whispered. Reese nodded. "We're close," he said. "He's still out there, and he's leaving a trail." Reese played the footage frame by frame. It wasn't perfect, blurry in motion, distorted under poor lighting, but that single fleeting glimpse had frozen the room. Caroline leaned close, fingers lightly pressed to her lips. There he was, not a boy anymore. Her son, aged 2 decades beyond the little boy who vanished from a treehouse on a warm July evening, was now a man, haunted in his posture, cautious in his movements, but unmistakably Charlie. "He's alive," she whispered. "He's really alive." For years, she had imagined this moment, wondered what it would feel like, whether she'd cry, fall apart, or scream. But now she sat quietly, her breath unsteady, not from fear, but awe, and something else, guilt. She couldn't explain it, couldn't name it, but something inside her had always whispered that maybe, just maybe, she'd missed something. And now, her son was a ghost on security footage. Mailing cryptic packages to the woman who once locked him beneath the floor, Reese began triangulating. Everything, Charlie's appearance at the post office, the packages, the P.O. box, there was a pattern. He was on a route. He was circling something. I think he's hiding near Lake Huron, Reese said finally. Each city those packages went to surrounded the shoreline. Caroline barely nodded. What's out there? She asked. Reese pulled up satellite images. Cabins, campgrounds, forest preserves, all quiet. Remote places where someone like Charlie, someone invisible by choice, could disappear. Carolyn reached into her purse and pulled out something she hadn't shown Reese yet, a birthday card, postmarked just weeks earlier. No signature, no return address, just one line inside, typed, "I'm not the same boy you lost. But I remember the way your voice shook when you read The Giving Tree. That's how I knew you loved me." Reese held it carefully. "Didn't you tell?" "Me? Because I didn't want to ruin it," Caroline whispered. "Didn't want to chase him away. What if he finally trusted me enough to reach out? What if he needed me to just wait?" Reese understood, but he also knew this wasn't over. Contacted Michigan state officials and arranged a quiet, informal search of 3 areas along the coast. No uniforms, no announcements, just a few unmarked vehicles, some off-duty officers, and one woman willing to walk quietly through the woods with a mother's eyes. Caroline arrived 2 days later. She didn't speak much. She wore a faded blue sweater Charlie had given her the Christmas before he vanished. In her pocket was the birthday card, folded and refolded until the creases softened the paper like cloth. She walked for hours through thick pines and muddy trails. Every snap of a branch sent her heart racing. Every echo of wind through leaves felt like breath waiting. Then she saw something. Not far off the trail, half hidden beneath brush and pine needles, was an old tent camouflaged, weathered. The kind hunters used in the off-season. Her voice trembled. "Reese." They approached together slowly, carefully. No movement inside. Reese peeled back the flap. It was empty but not abandoned. Inside were signs of recent life, a camp stove, a blanket, a book, The Giving Tree. Caroline stared at it, knees threatening to buckle. She reached forward and turned the inside cover. There, scribbled in pencil, were the words, "Still listening." Reese stood motionless beside her. He's close. They searched the surrounding woods for hours, widening the radius, calling his name softly through the trees. Nothing. The next day, Reese received a call. A nurse at a nearby health clinic had seen someone matching Charlie's description. "Came in with a cut hand," she said. "Didn't give a name, paid cash. Quiet. But before he left, he dropped something." She mailed it to the sheriff's office. A folded napkin written in shaky pen. "Please tell her I'm not hiding. I just don't know how to come back." Caroline wept when she read it. It wasn't fear keeping him wet, it was shame. She wrote a letter. No demands, no pressure, just one truth. "I love you, Charlie. Nothing you say, nothing you've been through, nothing you believe about yourself could make me stop. I have loved you every day you've been gone, and I will love you every day you remain away. But if you want to come home, even just for a minute, I'll be waiting always." They mailed it to the P.O. box. Weeks passed. No response. Caroline returned to Elm Hollow. She resumed her life quietly, not because she had given up, but because she now knew her son wasn't lost forever. He was watching, listening, deciding. In mid-November, a package arrived at the sheriff's department. No sender name, no return address. Inside was a VHS tape, old fuzzy quality, but labeled in black ink, 1995. Treehouse. Reese tracked down a working VCR and played it. The screen crackled. Then a handheld camera view of a boy Charlie sitting in the trapdoor room beneath his treehouse. He was older, maybe 12 or 13. He held a flashlight under his chin, joking like he was telling a ghost story. Then his voice turned quiet. "Mom," he said, "if anyone finds this, I just want you to know I thought about you every day. I knew you didn't forget me. I could feel it. He turned the camera around briefly to show Angela drawing in the corner. She said, "We'll get out one day. Someone will hear us." The tape cut to static, then ended. Caroline watched it in stunned silence. A frozen tear slid down her cheek. He had tried to reach her even then, and now, decades later, he was still trying. Reese placed the tape gently back into its case. "There's something else," he said quietly. He opened a folder on his desk. A new report, a construction permit. Filed 6 months earlier for a small cabin renovation near when the contractor listed C.W. Charlie Whitmore. They had him. They just had to knock. The cabin sat at the edge of an unmarked gravel road, wrapped in pine trees, nearly swallowed by the silence of northern Michigan. Snow dusted the porch steps like powdered sugar. A faded mailbox leaned near the edge of the property line. It read, C.W. Reese parked the car 2 houses down. Carolyn sat in the passenger seat, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. She was staring ahead, eyes locked on the outline of the roof, as if trying to will herself into the future, into the moment where she might finally see her son. "You don't have to go in," Reese said gently. "We can just watch." "Wait, no," she interrupted. "I'm going. If I've waited 20 years, I can walk 20 steps." She stepped out into the cold and moved slowly toward the cabin. No movement inside, just a faint plume of smoke from the chimney. Someone was home. Her boots crunched softly over the snow-covered leaves. Her breath was a whisper in the air. When she reached the porch, she stopped. The door wasn't locked. Wasn't even fully closed. She pushed gently. Inside was warmth. A low fire crackled in the stone hearth. The cabin was small, one room, with a modest kitchenette, a table, a chair, and a single cot. Caroline stepped in. The smell was familiar, wood, smoke, and something like old books. Then she saw him, sitting in the chair by the fire, back turned, shoulders slumped. "Charlie," she said softly. He didn't move. Her voice cracked. "Charlie, baby." His head tilted slightly. Then slowly he turned. It was him not. Just the face, not just the scar on his cheek or the gray in his eyes. It was in the way he looked at her, like he didn't know whether to run or collapse. Neither of them spoke. Then she stepped forward. He stood. They met in the middle of the room, and for a moment, neither reached out. Then he whispered, "I didn't. Think you'd really come?" She touched his face. "You're real," she whispered. "You're here." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know how to come back." She hugged him tighter than she ever thought she could. The years dissolved, the unanswered questions, the lost birthdays, the Christmas mornings, the wondering. All of it melted into that moment. But the peace didn't last, because Charlie's next words chilled her. "They're still out there." Caroline pulled back. "Who?" He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands together. "I wasn't the only one. Angela wasn't the only one." He pointed toward a small wooden box on the counter. "Open it." Caroline did. Inside were dozens of small slips of paper drawings, notes, names. Boys, girls, initials, some with dates, some with towns. "I wasn't the first," Charlie said, "and I wasn't the last." He began to speak slowly, as if lifting something heavy from inside him. "There were others after Angela, before her. I met some of them, heard about others. Not all of us were kept in the same places. Some only stayed days, others longer." Carolyn felt her knees go weak. She sat beside him, listening in silence. "I stayed the longest, I think," Charlie continued. "They said I was special, that I adapted, that I didn't fight as much." His voice cracked. They were wrong. Caroline wanted to cry, scream, do something, but she stayed still. "What happened to Angela?" she finally asked. Charlie closed his eyes. "She got sick one winter. The man Claymore, he wouldn't take her to a hospital, said he couldn't risk it. She died in her sleep. I buried her under the shelter near the lake. I marked it with a red rock. That's what she said her mom's locket looked like." Carolyn's heart fractured. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Charlie nodded. "Me too." Reese stepped in slowly then, quietly acknowledging Charlie without pressure. He sat near the fire but didn't crowd. Charlie explained more. How Claymore moved them between properties' crawl spaces, hidden tunnels, false rooms. How Margaret, Clary helped for a while until she couldn't anymore. She tried to return me, Charlie said. But by then, I didn't know how to be normal. I couldn't stay. I ran again. Hid got better at it. Why the packages? Reese asked gently. Charlie looked down. Because I wanted to be found, but I needed to stay safe. Reese nodded. Safe from who? Charlie hesitated. There was another man, he whispered. Not Claymore. Older, quiet, watched from the shadows. He only came once a month. I called him the Collector. He made decisions. Claymore followed them. Carolyn felt her stomach twist. How many more are there? She asked. Charlie looked at her with hollow eyes. I don't know, but if I'm still alive, one of them might be two. Reese stood. We can protect you now. If you're ready, we can help you bring all of it to light. Charlie looked toward the fire, then nodded once. Okay. That night he wrote down everything he remembered. Names, places, routines, code words. And finally, one name he had never told anyone before. The man who visited the Clary home in 1991, paid cash, who gave Charlie a backpack and told him to stay quiet. The name on the envelope? G. Whitmore. Caroline went cold. My brother, she whispered. Charlie didn't look up. I'm sorry, he said. He helped take me. Caroline stared at the name scrawled on the notepad like it was a foreign word. G. Whitmore, her brother, her only sibling, the man who had stood beside her in the weeks after Charlie vanished, who drove her to the sheriff's office, who held her hand in the church pew during candlelight vigils, who told her again and again, we'll find him. Don't give up. Her voice cracked as she said it out loud. Gordon. Charlie didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence between them was enough. Reese stood across the room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the notes. Are you sure, Charlie? Charlie nodded slowly. He had a scar behind his ear. I saw it when he leaned down to put the backpack on me. It was him. Caroline sank into the chair by the window, her legs trembling beneath her. Her mind replayed every conversation, every odd moment Gordon's sudden moves. His long drives out of town without notice, the way he changed jobs every year or two. She had never questioned it, never wanted to. But now it felt like her entire memory of the man had been rewritten in an instant. Reese gently asked Charlie, what exactly did he do? Charlie closed his eyes, searching through the fog of time. He wasn't there the first time I was taken, but he came later twice. Once he brought food, another time he took Angela away. That was the last time I saw her. Caroline's stomach twisted. Reese asked, did he say anything? Charlie's voice dropped. He told her, we're moving you. Your mom's been asking too many questions. The next morning, Reese pulled every record he could find on Gordon Whitmore. He had lived in 6 states over 15 years, never stayed long, held jobs in construction, security, even briefly as a maintenance worker at a private boarding school, under the radar. But one detail stood out. In 1993, Gordon worked a 6-month contract for the same real estate company that owned the old youth shelter in Elm Hollow. The one with the hidden crawl space beneath the floorboards. It was enough. Reese put in a request to the U.S. Marshals and prepared a quiet watch list for Gordon Whitmore. No arrests yet. Not without Charlie's sworn testimony and verification, but it was a start. Caroline didn't speak much that day. She sat by the fire, watching her son. Every now and then her eyes would land on the scar above his eyebrow. It's the one he got falling from the tire swing when he was 7. And she'd feel a dual grief for what she lost and awe that she'd found him again. But the ache deepened when she realized how much time had passed between them, how little she knew of the boy he had become, the man he was now. That night, Charlie asked her, something he hadn't said since he was 9. Will you read to me? She did. She pulled The Giving Tree from his shelf, the same one she'd found in his tent weeks ago, and she read it slowly, voice trembling, breath catching on old lines that suddenly felt brand new. When she reached the end, Charlie whispered, I used to imagine you as the tree. Caroline blinked back tears. Why? because no matter how much I took, you stayed. She reached for his hand. I never stopped waiting, Charlie, and I never will. The next morning, Reese got a call. A body had been found not far from the youth shelter, buried beneath a pile of stones under a collapsed shed. Female, child deteriorated but intact. A red stone locket lay beside her Angelus. Caroline stayed with Charlie as Reese traveled to the site. The forensics were slow, methodical, but the age matched. The dental records confirmed it. They finally knew where she had been, Reese called. Miriam Sutter personally. I thought I'd feel peace, she said after a long pause. But it just feels like another door closing. Reese nodded, though she couldn't see him. Sometimes, he said gently, that's the only way the others open. Back in Michigan, Charlie agreed to give a statement. It wasn't easy. Reese recorded every word as Charlie described Claymore's hidden rooms, the rules they were taught, the threats they endured. He detailed the false names, the nighttime transfers, the eerie silence that filled every space. And finally, he named Gordon. Said he called himself Uncle Ray around the others. Said he was the one who carried the ledger. Caroline asked Charlie what that meant. Kept track, Charlie said. A notebook, names, birthdays, statuses. Hesitated. Some were labeled traded, some returned. Caroline turned pale. What was I? He looked at her, held her gaze. Held. She couldn't speak. Reese filed the statement and sent it through official channels. It would take time, legal battles, delays, but now they had something no one could ignore. A witness, a survivor, a name, and a confession waiting in a Michigan cabin. The following evening, Reese stepped out to take a call. Leaving Caroline and Charlie alone in the warmth of the fire, she turned to him. There's something I need to ask. Charlie looked up. If I had found you sooner, do you think you would have come home? He paused, then answered truthfully. I don't know. I was scared of everything, of how broken I was. I didn't want you to see me that way. She placed her hand gently over his. I would have taken you in any condition, any day. You are my sunhole, or shattered. His voice cracked. I didn't want to ruin the version of me you remembered. You never could. They sat in silence for a while. Then he asked, what happens now? Carolyn smiled faintly. We keep going together. Reese's phone buzzed as he stood in the hallway of the sheriff's office. The number was flagged as internal, one of the Michigan marshals he'd spoken to. Week prior? Reese, the voice said, we've located Gordon Whitmore. He's in custody. Reese exhaled deeply, eyes shut for a moment. Where? Ottawa, near the border. He was trying to leave the country using falsified documents. Claimed he was. On a fishing trip, had a duffel bag with multiple IDs and $10,000 in cash. Reese clenched his jaw. Was he armed? Knife? Nothing more. He didn't resist. Said he expected this day to come. They were holding him at a small detention facility in Sault Ste. Marie. Caroline received the news incomplete. Silence not. Tear, not a word. She just sat by the window of the small Michigan cabin, watching the wind move through the trees outside. Charlie remained quiet for most of the morning. He hadn't said much since the statement. But Caroline noticed something different in him since Angela's remains were found, as if a breath he'd been holding for decades had finally been released, and yet that peace was fragile. Came next, might shatter it all over again. That afternoon, Reese returned to the cabin. He held a thin, yellowed manila envelope. What's that? Charlie asked. Reese handed it to him carefully. We went through some of Gordon's old properties, an abandoned farmhouse he once owned under a shell company. We found this beneath the floorboards. It's the ledger. Charlie froze. Caroline stared. Reese placed it gently on the table and opened it. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten records. Each row contained a first name, age, gender, date, status. Many were marked as moved, placed, reclaimed, or lost. But some were labeled secured, and then there were codes. One stood out. CW 1991H. Charlie Whitmore, 1991, held. Caroline flipped slowly through the book. There were dozens of names. Angela's was there too. AW 1991T. Angela Williams, 1991, transferred. Charlie turned away, his breathing uneven. Then he spoke, so low. Caroline almost missed it. There was a man in the woods. He never came close, but he watched. I called him the other. Claymore said he was the one who kept the records, that he collected outcomes. Reese nodded. It was Gordon. But why? Caroline whispered. Why would he do that? Why us? Why Charlie? Reese paused. We're piecing it together, but it's bigger than just Gordon and Claymore. He pulled out a photocopy of a bank statement found in Gordon's things. Multiple deposits, private accounts, anonymous donors. Gordon was part of a ring-a-hidden network, moving children across rural areas, using abandoned shelters, unused church properties, underfunded institutions places. No one looks. Caroline's face went pale. Reese added, but Charlie wasn't taken at random. He handed her a second document. A letter dated June 1991 to Gordon Whitmore from Midwest Behavioral Wellness Fund, thanking him for his facilitation of candidate CW19's entry into the Social Behavioral Study Program. Caroline's hands shook. Reese explained gently. They targeted specific children, quiet, isolated, intelligent. Charlie was selected before he disappeared. They planned it. The room fell silent. Charlie whispered, I was an experiment. No, Caroline said fiercely. You were a child, a son, my son, and they stole you. Reese pointed to the envelope again. One more thing. Here's a photograph. He slid it out slowly, a black and white. Polaroid. 3 men stood in a basement beside a child-sized cot. One of them was Claymore. Another was Gordon. The third, Caroline gasped. It was her late father. Charlie looked confused. Who is that? Caroline's voice broke. Your grandfather. She stood, stepped away. Her whole body trembled. My father died. In 1988, she whispered. Why is he in a photo with Claymore? Reese didn't answer. He didn't have to. Caroline slowly pieced it together, a terrible puzzle finally aligning. My father was a county commissioner. He had access to hospital records. He donated land to youth homes. Charlie's voice cracked. You think he started this? I don't know, Caroline whispered. But I think Gordon didn't act alone. And if that's true, then this was generational, hidden inside trusted families, quiet partnerships. Till now. Caroline sat down beside Charlie, resting her hand on his knee. You're not a project? Charlie looked at her, tears in his eyes. Then what am I? You're my miracle, she said. And they will not take another day from us. Later that night, Charlie stared into the fire. He asked, Do you believe in evil? Caroline didn't answer right away, then softly said, I believe some people forget how to be human, and I believe it takes something human to remind them. He nodded. I want to testify. I want to name them, all of them. Reese nodded slowly. That takes courage. Charlie's voice was steady, not courage, anger. Caroline reached out and held his hand again. The ledger would go to federal authorities the next morning. The case would grow larger than Elm Hollow, larger than Michigan. There were names from Kentucky, Ohio, Iowa, even parts of Pennsylvania. But for tonight, in a small cabin, by a quiet lake, a boy who vanished beneath the floorboards in 1991 sat in the light of his mother's love. And the truth, after all this time, was no longer buried. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, and heavy. Charlie sat at the witness stand, hands folded. In his lap, his voice steady, but low. He told the truth, not just the facts, but the feeling of it all. The hunger, the dark. The sound of leaves above him while he sat alone beneath floorboards, waiting to be found. The way a flashlight became a lighthouse. How Angela used to hum. Lullabies she didn't remember the words to. How it all stayed with him. Carolyn watched from the front row. She didn't cry. She wanted him to see her strong. Gordon never turned to look at them. He sat with his attorney, pale and still. He never said a word, not to Charlie, not to the court. The ledger, the photos, and Charlie's testimony had spoken louder than he ever could. It wasn't just about Gordon anymore. Federal. Prosecutors opened investigations into others named in the ledger. Former caretakers, a now-defunct real estate nonprofit, and several quiet donors once thought to be harmless philanthropists. The story hit the press, but most reporters never got Charlie's name. He stayed anonymous by choice. He didn't want pity. He just wanted peace. 3 months after the trial, Carolyn moved into a small house near Traverse City. Charlie lived in the cabin by the lake, but now he visited every Sunday, fixed her sink. She baked him cinnamon rolls. Sometimes they sat on the porch and said nothing for hours. Their silence was filled with understanding, not distance. One day, while packing a box from her old attic, Carolyn found a cassette labeled Charlie. Age 5, she brought it to him the next week. He smiled as he slid it into a dusty player. But I forgot where the treasure is. They laughed together, a sound that had been gone too long from both their lives. Then Charlie grew quiet. "You know what I miss most?" he said. She shook her head. "Being a kid," he whispered. Before all of it, Carolyn nodded, eyes wet. "You were always a kid to me," she said softly. "How you cried at the end of Bambi. How you always picked the red crayon." He smiled faintly. "And now," she said, "you're still mine, just older." That fall, Caroline hosted Thanksgiving for the first time in years. Charlie came early to help set the table. She gave him the wishbone from the turkey. They each made a wish and pulled. Charlie won. But when she asked him what he wished for, he didn't answer. He just looked around the room at the warm light, the scent of pumpkin pie, the family photographs lining the walls, and then he said, "This."